It was Halloween night in 2010, and I was 12 years old. Ever since I was really young, I would go trick-or-treating with the same group of friends. My school was really small, so I didn't have a lot of choice anyway. Our neighborhood was very low on crime, so we were allowed to go trick-or-treating on our own. We did so since we were 9 or 10. Therefore, we were pretty comfortable with our area. Looking back, I could admit that we were naive. I definitely do things differently, with the power of hindsight. Once we all got our costumes on, me and my friends met at my place to start trick-or-treating. My mom gave me a cell phone to take with me. I didn't have my own yet, but my mom made me take it whenever I was out without my parents. There were 3 of us in total. It was me and my friends Jake and Jude. We all dressed up in different low-effort costumes. I was a ninja, but I don't remember exactly what the rest of them were. It was around 6 o'clock, and the sun was pretty much gone. It wasn't completely dark yet, but the streets were well lit anyway. The roads were organized in a grid format with rows of houses. There was a small woods and a river on the far end, and our school was right in front of that. We rang doorbells for a while, getting a decent amount of candy. At one point, a car passed us slowly. There was a single man, and he was dressed in a really extravagant clown costume. Looked like he might have been some kind of professional. We could see as he passed that his makeup was partially wiped off. It was a creepy sight, and we all noticed it. The man took a long stare at us, but never stopped. Within 10 or 15 seconds, he turned down a street and was out of our sight. I looked at Jake and saw that he was a little concerned too, but neither of us said anything. We kept going for another hour or two, but by around 8:30, most of the houses had their lights off. That usually means it's all over. We tried to go to one last house, but when we rang the doorbell, no one answered. After that, we accepted that there was no more trick-or-treating. By that time, we were right near the woods, and only a few houses down from the school. Since we were all having a good time, none of us wanted to go home yet. Knowing our parents, they wouldn't start to get worried until at least 9 or 9:30, so we decided to hang out and dig into our candy a bit. I suggested that we go over to the school and hang out in the playground. Although the streets were lined with lampposts, the school was quite dark. When we walked into the gate, we could barely see at all. After a few minutes, our eyes adjusted and we walked over to the basketball courts, where there was a long bench. The 3 of us sat down there and started talking. We were there for about 10 minutes when we saw a dark figure walking towards us. Jude noticed it first and pointed it out to the others. I was worried that we were going to get in trouble for being out there after hours. It kept getting closer, and when it did, we could tell that it was a man. He was large, at least 6'2", and wearing a clown costume. My mind immediately remembered that creepy-looking guy in the car earlier, and I was pretty sure it was him. Eventually, he was standing right in front of us. His face was smeared with white makeup. Other than that, he looked normal from the neck up. He wasn't wearing a wild wig or a funny hat like you might expect. From the neck down, though, he was in full clown attire, right down to the giant shoes. My friends and I stopped talking and stared up at the guy. The first thing he said to us was something like,
"Hey guys, how's it going?"
We were all silent. Just then, I felt my phone vibrating. The ringer was on silent, but I knew someone was calling. I didn't answer it though, because I was too focused on that creepy clown standing right in front of me. The man then said,
"I have a lot of candy left over from the party I was just at. Come with me, and we'll get it."
He pointed out to the street, and I could see a car parked near the school. After a while, my phone was going crazy. I didn't know if it was calls, text messages, or both. We all looked at each other. None of us trusted that guy, but I didn't know what to do. Out of nowhere, Jude got up and sprinted in the opposite direction. In hindsight, that was the smartest thing you could do. There was no way that guy was going to be able to chase us with those giant clown shoes. Jake and I followed. When we got to the back fence of the playground, the gate was closed. We stopped for a second and then looked back. The clown man was standing around 150 feet away, not running, but walking towards us. We then climbed the fence and found ourselves outside the woods that backed onto the school. There was a pathway that went along the fence. We went the opposite direction to where the car was, and when we got out to the street, we felt a little safer. That was when I checked my phone. I had 5 missed calls, all from my mom. There were also a few text messages, also from my mom. I opened one of them, and all it said was "come home now," in all capitals. My friends and I ran to our respective houses, making it there in 5 or 10 minutes. When I got home, my mom was waiting at the front door, crying. She hugged me when I walked up to the porch. That was when I noticed at least 2 police cars circling our street. I still didn't understand what was happening, but I would soon find out. My mom asked me where I was, so I told her what happened at the school. As soon as I did, she called the police. They were there in less than a minute. The cops interviewed me on my porch, asking me for every detail about the man I saw and what his car looked like. After about 10 minutes, they were gone. Apparently what happened was that there was a kidnapping attempt that night. A kid a few years younger than us was almost abducted by a man in a clown costume, not far from where we were at the school. Luckily, the kid was out with his mom, and she was able to scare the guy away, and then she called the cops. My mom was blowing up my phone because she knew there was somebody out there, and I was out without parents. As far as I know, the man was never caught, but this was the first and only incident of its kind that ever happened in my neighborhood. I lived there until I graduated high school, and as far as I know, it was an isolated incident. Halloween is a time when everybody wants to be scared, but this was on another level. It was too much. We had a Halloween party at my house when I was in college. I was in my 3rd year, and I had a house with my 3 friends. We would have a few parties at our place every year. It would just be our extended friend group that would be invited. We never did the wild everyone can come type of party. It was just friends and friends of friends that we would let in. It was 8 o'clock on the 31st of October. Our neighborhood was mostly student houses, so we got very few trick-or-treaters. If my memory is right, it was just 2 families that came by. Our next-door neighbor had 2 kids, plus another family that was in the apartment building across the street. I decided to go to the store, pick up some drinks before everyone arrived. On my way back, I passed a guy on the sidewalk a few streets away from my house. He was wearing a strange costume. It looked like he was some kind of patient from an insane asylum, but he had his entire face covered with a white cloth. Also on the cloth were large black dots where the eyes would be. I also noticed that he was carrying a sack or a pillowcase that was full. It looked like he was trick-or-treating, but he was way too old. It was creepy, but I guess that's the point. By the time I got back home, a few of my friends had shown up. There were 8 or 10 people there in total. Being that it was Halloween, everybody was wearing costumes. I dressed as Don Draper from Mad Men, because I wanted everyone to think that I'm cool and handsome. I won't go over everybody else's costumes in detail, but it was everything from bedsheet ghosts to more elaborate ones. We poured a few drinks and turned on some music. As it got later into the night, more people showed up. By 10 o'clock, there were 20 or 25 people there. I knew everyone I had seen so far, although some people were covering their faces with their costumes. Even though I was drinking a little, I stayed pretty sober for the whole night. One of my other roommates did the same, just to make sure everything stayed under control. We had a good group of friends though, so there were no real problems. By 11, things had reached their peak. There were about 30 people there. A little more than I was expecting, but it was still under control. Nobody was super drunk, no fights or anything. I was standing around in the kitchen talking with a friend when I looked into the living room. I saw somebody walk by who was out of place. It looked like that weird guy who I saw on the sidewalk before, the one who was dressed like a mental hospital patient. He walked by quickly and was out of my view in no time. I barely even noticed, and I wasn't sure if it was really him. Curious enough to check it out, I excused myself and walked off in the direction where he went. Past our living room was the upstairs and also the stairs to the basement. When I turned the corner, I realized that he must have gone in one of those 2 places. I saw both staircases, but the mysterious man was gone. The basement of the house was unfinished, and we just used it for storage and laundry. There wasn't really anything down there, so I decided to check the upstairs first. When I walked up the stairs, I could hear somebody rummaging around in my room. I peeked around the corner and got a glimpse of that creepy guy in the asylum costume. We were being robbed. Although I wanted to burst in there and confront him, it was smarter to get help. I called the police first and described the guy who I saw. He had a pretty distinct look, so it was easy. Next, I found one of my roommates to make sure he didn't get away. We walked to the bottom of the stairs. When I looked up, I was met with a terrifying sight. He was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at us. He was holding a bag in one hand. "Hey man, I called the police. Just put everything back and you can go, I said. The guy didn't hesitate. He briskly walked down the stairs. When he was halfway down, I saw him pull a knife out from somewhere. Holding the knife in one hand and the bag in the other, my roommate and I moved out of the way. There were two of us and one of him, but neither of us was armed, and we didn't want to get stabbed. We stood there and watched the guy disappear into the crowd, and then the door opened and slammed. Minutes later, the police arrived. I answered the door to two officers. Down on the sidewalk in front of my house, there were another two cops, and they had someone in handcuffs. It looked like the guy we had seen before, but now his face was showing. They must have taken his mask off. Our intruder looked just like a normal guy. He was clean cut and maybe 30 years old, if not even younger. The police told me that they arrested the man moments ago. I was positive that it was him. If I wasn't sure enough already, after going through the bag that he was carrying, they found my laptop, along with each of my roommates' laptops. He also had some other things that belonged to one of my roommates. During my conversation with the police, I mentioned that he also threatened me with a knife. I was hoping that would add additional charges, but there's no telling if it made a difference. It was around midnight by then, so we waited it out for people to go home. By 1, it was just me and my other roommates. We spent the next hour cleaning the house and talking about what just happened. All in all, this was by far the scariest Halloween of my life. Sometimes I wonder if the man was just bluffing with the knife. Would he have actually stabbed us if we didn't get out of the way? We never found out how dangerous he actually was, but I'm glad that we didn't take that chance. I've always loved Halloween, but last year something happened that almost changed that. I'm 25 years old, so I was 24 at the time. I lived alone in a ground floor apartment that was half of the main floor of an older house. The floor was divided up into 2 separate apartments with their own entrances that were right next to each other. My landlord was in the other one. He was away on vacation when this happened. There were some kids around there, so although I was way too old to be trick-or-treating, I would still join in by giving out candy. When Halloween night came, I was all ready with a good amount of candy. There were some families among my neighbors who I knew well, and I always tried to be one of the more generous to the kids who came to my door. On this Halloween night in particular, though, it was pouring rain. I wasn't sure how many of them would still go out. There was one year when I was a kid where we had a blizzard on the 31st, so the whole neighborhood agreed to delay Halloween by a week or so. It didn't happen this night, so I figured it was still on. Early in the night, I looked out my front window and saw a car parked on my street right in front of the house. Rain was pelting it, but I could still see that there were 3 grown men inside. They seemed to be wearing costumes of some kind, but I couldn't tell what they were. I figured they were going to some Halloween party, so I didn't worry. Shortly after, a few trick-or-treaters showed up. My doorbell rang for the first time at around 6 p.m. The rain was still pouring. I went to answer it, and there were a group of boys who were around 10 to 12 years old. I knew one of them from around the neighborhood. They were laughing and having a good time, clearly enjoying the ridiculousness of the night. I gave them some candy, and they ran off to the next house. That was when I noticed that the car from before was still there. It was a little further down the street, but it was definitely still the same one. The lights were on, and 3 guys were just sitting there. Again, I didn't worry, because there are a million reasonable explanations, but it did seem strange to me. Several more came to my door, and each time I went out, I saw that car was still there, still in the same spot, and the rain was still falling. It was even harder than before. By 7:30, I was pretty sure nobody else was coming, so I sat down in my living room and started watching a movie. I would usually watch at least a few classic horror movies on Halloween and dig into whatever candy was left. By 10 p.m., I was on my second movie, which was one of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Then I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anybody, and it was too late for trick-or-treaters. As I sat in my living room, I looked out the window. The rain had eased up considerably, but it was still coming down somewhat. I got up from the couch and walked to the front door. My door had a small window that I could see through, and there were at least 2 guys standing on my porch. When I got closer, I looked out the larger window beside the door, and I could see there were 3 of them. They were around my age, if not a little older, and they were wearing Halloween costumes. One of them was an elf, or something like that. Another had some kind of superhero costume, and I have no idea what the third was wearing. My eyes then went to the street, and I could see that car from before was still there, but now it was empty. I was pretty sure the guys on my porch were the ones who were in the car. As I was looking out the window, one of them saw me.
Hey man, does Andrew live here?
He asked. No, I think you've got the wrong place, I said. He then said okay, and the three men walked away towards the car. Seemed like an honest mistake, but I was still curious why they were sitting out there that whole time. It was hours that they had been out there. Maybe they left and came back, but that would be just as suspicious. Whatever the case may be, I finished the movie and then watched part of another before it got late. At around midnight, I went to bed. By around 12:30, I was still awake, and I heard some noises on my porch. I thought I heard my next-door neighbor's door open. That couldn't be, because he wasn't due back for another 2 days. Too curious to let it go, I tiptoed to my front door and looked out. There was nobody there, but when I turned my attention to the road, I could see that same car from before. There was a single man sitting in the driver's seat. Although it was dark, I was pretty sure he was one of the men that came to my door earlier. All of a sudden, I started to hear footsteps in my landlord's place. The walls were pretty thin, so I could clearly tell that somebody was there. At least one person, probably two. Since I knew that my landlord was away, it must have been a break-in. I got the police on the line and whispered that somebody was robbing my next-door neighbor. I gave them the address and told them to hurry. As I waited for the police, the noises continued. There were definitely two people in my neighbor's place. Not long later, the police showed up. I heard the whole thing from my apartment. As I listened, my biggest fear was that I would hear a gunshot, but luckily that never happened. I looked out my window and saw two men being led away in handcuffs. As you may have already guessed, they were the two guys who showed up on my doorstep earlier in the night. I have no doubt that they came to my door to check if I was home. If I wasn't, then maybe I would have been targeted as well. The one thing they didn't count on was the fact that I could hear through my neighbor's walls. If not for that, then they probably would have gotten away with it.